Okay, you heard that. So my name is Igor. I'm an agile coach at Product Doc, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the first PD Talk, which is done in cooperation with Serbian product community. And our very first guest here is Teresa Torres. So welcome, Teresa, and thank you for coming to our session.
Thank you for having me.
And for those of you who do not know, if there are people like this, so I would say that Teresa is one of the best product discovery coaches out there. I personally took a couple of her courses, read a ton of blog posts, and read her new book, Continuous Discovery Habits, a couple of times. So, and it's worth it. It's really worth it. I see Teresa has some slides and stories for us. So I'll just let her do the talk.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Igor. All right. Well, welcome everybody to the what and why of continuous discovery. I'm Teresa Torres. I do work as a product discovery coach, and I always like to share at the beginning of this talk that I've worked with teams all over the world in a wide variety of contexts and a wide variety of industries. Some companies as small as just a 2-person founding team, other companies as big as multinational companies with hundreds of thousands of employees. And the reason why I like to share that is we're going to talk about a lot of discovery framework and a lot of tactics. And I want you to know they've been tested in a lot of different environments. So odds are I've worked with a team like yours. So I wanted to encourage you to think about how you might adopt some of these practices yourself. Okay, so we're going to start at the very beginning here and just talk about what do we mean by discovery. So we often talk about discovery in contrast with delivery, where discovery represents the work that we're doing to decide what to build, and delivery is the work that we're doing to build, ship, and maintain a production quality product. And this distinction is becoming really popular because a lot of companies have often really emphasized delivery and often underemphasized discovery. The other change that we're starting to see is that companies are starting to shift from a project mindset to a continuous mindset. So you may be familiar with this on the delivery side, where we're moving to more frequent releases. We're moving towards more continuous delivery or continuous deployment platforms. And we're starting to see the same shift on the discovery side, where instead of doing big project research, we're starting to do more continuous integration of the customer as we make just decisions about what to build. So I want to start with just a really clear definition of continuous discovery. This definition comes from my book, Continuous Discovery Habits, where I define continuous discovery as, at a minimum, weekly touch points with customers by the team building the product, where they're conducting small research activities in pursuit of a desired product outcome. Now, I know there's a lot to this definition. We're actually going to break it down line by line. And I want to start with this first line that really is about a cadence. Why is it important to adopt a weekly cadence where we're engaging with customers every week? And that's because as product people, we're making product decisions every day. So some of those decisions are big strategic decisions, like which customers should we serve, what opportunities should we go after, what outcomes should we measure. Others are more just everyday decisions, like what do we label this button, or how should this workflow work, or what does the underlying data model need to support. And most of us know that some of those big strategic decisions, like which customers to serve, we should do some project research, right? This is where we tend to see companies invest in market research or business intelligence research. But we forget that those daily decisions can also benefit from customer input. And the reason for this is that as product people, anybody who works on a digital product, we're thinking about our product all day, every day. We're starting to develop expertise about how our product works. What does it support? Where does everything live in the interface? How do you do different things within the product? The challenge is our customers don't have that same level of expertise with our product. And so product teams start to suffer from this bias called the curse of knowledge. And what that bias says is that as we start to develop expert knowledge, we forget what it's like to not have that knowledge. So we forget what it's like to not know our product inside and out. And so as we make these daily decisions, we start to make them from our expert point of view, and they stop working for our customer who doesn't have as much knowledge as we do about how our product works. So fortunately, there's an easy way to fix this, and that's we just simply want to engage with our customers on a more frequent basis. The more often that we chat with our customers, the more likely we're going to see the gap between how we think about our product and how our customers think about the product. And most of us, when we start to see that gap, we're motivated to overcome it, right? We just need to build awareness that we think about the product a little bit differently than customers do. Now, there's another benefit to this weekly cadence. When we talk to customers on a regular basis, we start to get feedback before we're ready. So a lot of us that are doing project-based research, we do what I call validation research. So we do all the design work, we're ready for the engineers to start building it, and at the last minute, we do some usability research to verify, did we get the design right? Or we build all the features and we use A/B testing to validate, did we build the right thing? Validation research is important. We should be doing those activities. But if we get feedback from customers much earlier in the process, if we get feedback when our designs are pencil sketches, when we get feedback when we don't even know what problem we're solving yet, it's actually a lot less expensive and a lot easier and faster to integrate customer feedback. And we start to adopt what I call a co-creation mindset. So this is where we're actually co-creating with our customers. We're letting them help shape the ideas as we develop them. And so what we see here is when teams start to get feedback each and every week, we're getting feedback before we're ready, before we have all the answers. And that's what creates space for customers to co-create with us. Now, inevitably, when I talk about co-creation, people in the audience think about one or two kind of innovation quotes. So the first comes from Steve Jobs, where he said, customers don't know what they want until we show it to them. And the second one, allegedly Henry Ford, in response to cars, said that if I had asked what customers wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So what Steve Jobs and Henry Ford are getting at in those quotes is that customers often don't know what's possible with technology, right? We're the technologies. They don't know what technology can do. They don't know what to ask for. So I want to be really clear that when we talk about co-creation, I'm not talking about going to your customers and saying, hey, what should we build? Instead, what we want to do is we want to work with our customers to understand their world, their context, their needs, their pain points, their desires, and then combine that with our knowledge of what's possible with technology and co-create a better solution together. Okay, so we've talked through this first line of the definition of weekly touch points with customers. We're now going to get into the second line of by the team building the product. So some companies have made the mistake, and especially we see this with a project-based research, where they outsource the research to another team. So there's a centralized research team that's doing research and handing it off to the product team. The challenge with this is that when research is handed off to us, it's often not timely, right? So product teams work on this fast week-over-week cadence, and we need fast answers to our daily questions. There's very few centralized research teams that can support multiple product teams on that fast cadence. The other thing that we see is when the team that's building the product does their own research, their research is more believable and it's more actionable. And what we really want is we want product teams that are building the product to believe the research and act on it. So we want the team that's building the product to do their own research. And there's a big misconception. A lot of people think we have a discovery team and then we have a delivery team, and the discovery team is handing off to the delivery team. So I can't emphasize this enough. We really have one team. It starts with this idea of a product trio. So a product trio is typically comprised of a product manager, a software engineer, and a designer. The idea of the trio is that they're working together from the beginning when making decisions about what to build, and they work together all the way through delivery. So it's the same team that's starting with a customer need, an outcome, figuring out what should we build, and then that's the same team that's building it. Now, the reason why it's important that these three roles collaborate from the beginning, I want to contrast this with what we used to do. So we used to have the product manager gather or write requirements hand them off to the designer who did all the design work. And then the requirements and the designs got handed off to the engineers who then implemented it. The challenge with all these handoffs is we lose a lot of context, we lose a lot of nuance. It's a little bit like a game of telephone where one person shares a message with somebody else, and each hop, there's a little bit of distortion in the message. We also see a lot of rework with these handoffs. So what ends up happening is the requirements get handed off to the designers run into design constraints, we have to rewrite requirements. And then eventually we get the requirements and the design right, they get handed off to the engineers run into technical constraints, we have to rewrite requirements, redo design. So there's a lot of back and forth, there's a lot of rework, there's a lot of lost context and nuance. So what we're seeing is that teams are starting to realize that if we just start collaborating from the very beginning, we get fewer handoffs, we lose less of the message, people stay closer to the customer, we build better solutions. Now, most of us have more than just these 3 roles on our team. You probably have additional engineers on your team. Depending on your DevOps strategy, you might have QA folks or release managers on your team. Depending on how you interface with the rest of the business, you might have data analysts or product marketing managers or customer success folks. Maybe you have the luxury of having a user researcher on your team. So here's what I want to emphasize. When we're talking about a product trio leading discovery, they're not the only people on the team involved in discovery. We want everybody who's building the product to have firsthand exposure to the customer. But what we're trading off with this idea of the trio is speed of decision-making with quality of decision-making. So for speed, the fewer people involved in the decision, the faster we'll make a decision. But quality of decision-making, we want the right cross-functional roles represented to make the best decision that we can. So this idea of a trio can flex based on the type of decision you're making and based on the roles that are available to you at your company. So what we see across the industry is generally, at a minimum, we want these 3 roles involved in your discovery decisions. But depending on the type of decision you're making, you might invite others to be a part of that decision. Or depending on the roles available to you, your trio might become a quad. So I'll give a couple of examples. If you're working on your go-to-market strategy and you're trying to figure out how to package your product, how to price your product, what marketing channels to use, you're probably going to invite your product marketing manager to do that discovery work with you. So your trio might temporarily become a quad, where you do that discovery work together, you make those decisions together, and then once that's done, you go back to being a trio. Or if you work on a really data-heavy product and you really need a data analyst or a data scientist or someone with some machine learning expertise to be a part of most of your decisions, your trio might always be a quad, right? Because you want them involved in every decision. So you can think about it, this idea is really flexible. It can flex based on the type of decision you're making, or it can flex based on the roles available at your company. But you want to remember that trade-off between speed and quality. You want to tap into the different cross-functional roles that can help you make a better decision, but you want to keep the team as small as possible so that you're able to move quickly. Okay, so we've covered these first 2 lines. First, we talked about this weekly cadence where we're engaging with customers every week. We're trying to overcome that curse of knowledge. We're getting research that's actionable and timely and believable. And in order to make that research actionable, timely, and believable, we need the team that's building the product to be driving their own research. So now let's talk about these last 2 lines. This is where we're really going to get into the meat of the talk. The goal is that the trio, when they're engaging with customers on a weekly basis, they're conducting small research activities. So we can't take our old project-based research methods and try to do them every week. We'll just burn ourselves out. And the key is, so we're going to change our research methods to be smaller and lighter weight, more continuous. And the key is that those research methods should be in service of pursuing a desired outcome. So we're not doing research for research's sake, we're doing research to move a metric. And really keeping those 2 things in balance, making sure that our research is driving an outcome, is a little more challenging than it sounds. And so there's a visual I like to use to help teams manage this process. It's called an opportunity solution tree. And this visual was designed to help you chart the best path to your desired outcome. So we're going to talk about outcomes. We're going to start by defining a clear outcome. What's our goal as a team? What are we trying to achieve? And again, I want to contrast this with what we historically do, where a lot of teams work from a fixed roadmap. They're starting with a list of outputs and they're delivering features. A lot of the industry is moving away from this focus on roadmaps because roadmaps assume we can predict the future. They assume that we know right now what we should be building 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 12 months from now. And a lot of us are recognizing that the future is uncertain, it's unpredictable, we need to be more adaptable. And instead of focusing on specific outputs, we're looking at what's the impact we need those outputs to have, what metric do we need to move, and then we're looking at how do we set an outcome that helps us measure progress towards that metric. A good example of this is most product teams started January 2020 with a 12-month roadmap. And by March of 2020, when we saw a global economic slowdown, and a lot of people start working from home, many companies had to move away from their roadmaps and learn how to be a lot more adaptable and a lot more nimble. We get that with a focus on outcomes. So I'm gonna give an example. I'm actually not, can someone tell me maybe in the chat, is Netflix available in Serbia, or do you have a similar streaming entertainment service? Can I get just somebody to tell me in the chat whether or not that's a familiar product for you? It is, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm gonna use Netflix as an example because generally people around the world are familiar with Netflix. So let's imagine there's a product team at Netflix and they used to be told build these specific features, and they're trying to move to an outcome mindset. So an outcome might be something like you're going to start with your business model. So Netflix is a subscriber business, a subscription business. Some of the metrics that they're going to care about are things like customer acquisition, customer retention. So you could imagine that a business leader would go to a product team and say, we don't know what outputs you should build, but we want you to focus on increasing subscriber retention. That's the value we need you to create for the business. That's what your outcome represents. Now, if we want to be a good customer-centric team, we also need to discover the opportunities that have the potential to drive that outcome. So opportunities represent customer value. They just mean unmet customer needs, pain points, or desires, right? So we're looking at how do we create customer value in a way that's going to also create business value. And then in this outcome world, we're still outputs still matter. We do have to discover the solutions that will address those opportunities, creating customer value in a way that will drive our outcome, creating business value. So this visual is going to help us manage all of that. It's going to help us make sure we start with an outcome, that we discover how the outcome is going to represent business value. We're going to discover opportunities to make sure we're creating customer value, and we're going to discover solutions so we know exactly what to build. So let's talk through how this works. It really does start at the beginning where we're looking at how do we define an outcome. This really, in an ideal world, should be a two-way negotiation between your product leader, so your chief product officer, your VP of product, somebody who has the across the business executive view of how your team can create business value, and your product trio. And the reason why this should be a two-way negotiation is because oftentimes our senior leaders communicate in business outcomes, things like those financial metrics like increased subscriber retention. And we want the product trio to translate that to a product outcome. So a product outcome is a behavior that occurs in the product that the product team can directly influence. So in this case, if a product team at Netflix was tasked with increased subscriber retention, they'd have to generate a theory of how the product could increase retention. In this case, maybe it's something like, we believe if you watch Netflix more, you're going to be more likely to keep your subscription. So we're going to focus on driving engagement, viewer engagement. That's a behavior that's occurring in the product that the product team can influence. Once that outcome is in place, we're going to look at our first small research activity that we're going to do on a weekly cadence, and that's interviewing. We're interviewing to discover opportunities. Now, a lot of product teams make the mistake of thinking about interviewing as a way to evaluate solutions. We're going to look at that piece in a little bit, but I want you to think about interviewing as a way to discover unmet needs, unmet pain points, unmet desires. So we're interviewing to discover the opportunity space. Now, the opportunity space is always changing, right? The world around us is always changing. Sometimes big external trends like COVID impact the opportunity space. Sometimes new competitors enter the market and affect the opportunity space. Even our own code releases, every time we ship something to customers, it's having an impact on the opportunity space. We address some needs, we create other new pain points, we create new points of friction. We meet enough needs that we start to uncover new needs. Because the opportunity space is always changing, we want to be interviewing on a continuous basis. We want to have a continuous understanding of the opportunity space. Now, the reason why most teams don't do this is because recruiting is often the biggest barrier to interviewing every week. It can be hard to find someone to talk to week after week. So I really recommend that people start by automating the recruiting process. What this looks like is I want you to wake up on Monday morning, look at your calendar, and already have an interview scheduled without you having to do anything. For a lot of teams, this sounds magical. I'm going to give you 3 common ways of automating the recruiting process. The first is to recruit people while they're using your product or service. This strategy works extremely well for consumer companies and for business-to-business companies where you're trying to recruit end users. So if you have a SaaS product and you're trying to interview end users, you can recruit people while you already have their attention, while they're using your product or service. If you try to use this strategy, you have to think about it like a product funnel. You're going to have to optimize it. You're going to have to think about, where do you show the message? What do you ask for? What do you offer in exchange for a reward? Who are you recruiting? How far out are you scheduling? All of these are variables that will be, what the right answer will be different based on your unique audience. So you might have to experiment a little bit to get this to work. But a lot of the teams that I work with are using this method to guarantee they have somebody to talk to week in and week out. Now, if you are looking to interview enterprise buyers, so they're not people that are in your product every day, but they're your decision makers in a B2B context, you can use the second strategy, which is to define triggers for your customer-facing teams. So let me explain this a little bit. But your customer-facing teams, I mean your sales teams, your account managers, your customer support teams, anybody that you work with that's already on the phone with your customers all day, every day, or they're responding to support tickets, you can define a trigger for them. A trigger could be as simple as, if you're talking to a customer and they're experiencing this need, ask them if they'll do an interview with the product team, and go ahead and put it on our calendar. That's the key piece, is you're using your customer-facing teams to book your interviews for you. This works extremely well for B2B context where you're trying to interview buyers, people that are already talking to your customer-facing teams. Now, I will share the vast majority of teams that I work with are using one of these 2 methods to automate their recruiting process. The third method is going to work in a very specific, 2 very specific instances. I don't recommend it for most companies, but if you fall into one of these 2 categories, you'll want to use this third strategy. So the first category is if you have a teeny tiny total addressable market. So I don't mean small customer base, I mean small total addressable market. I'll give you an example. I worked with a company here in the United States. Their total addressable market was movie studios in the United States of a certain size. There's 6 of them total. So their total addressable market was 6 companies. So this third strategy, which I'm going to introduce in a minute, is really good if that's your situation. Your total addressable market is teeny tiny. The second instance in which it's really helpful is if your customer is extremely hard to reach. Now, we all think our customers are extremely hard to reach, so I'm going to give a couple of examples. I'm talking about Fortune 500 CEOs. I'm talking about respiratory ICU physicians and nurses during the height of COVID. people that are not going to be in your product all the time, that are not going to volunteer their time. In both those instances, teeny tiny total addressable market or a very hard to reach audience, you can set up a customer advisory board. This is where you're building longer term relationships with a small set of customers, but you're still inviting them to do one-on-one interviews. So you're using this pool of people to populate your interviews. Okay, I again will share the vast majority of teams that I work with are automating their recruiting process by recruiting people while they're using your product, their products or service. They're using their customer facing teams by defining triggers, and they're setting up customer advisory boards to reach those really hard to reach customers. Once we have folks to interview, we need to start looking at how do we ask the right questions. And the key to interviewing well is to avoid speculation. So if I continue with my Netflix example, let's say I work at Netflix and I'm interviewing you, I might want to know things like, what do you like to watch? How do you decide what to watch? Where do you watch? Who do you watch with? What device do you typically watch on? The challenge is, if I ask you those questions directly, your answers aren't going to be reliable. What do I mean by reliable? They're not necessarily going to reflect your behavior in actuality. And that's because humans are not very good at answering direct questions out of context. It's not that we're being deceptive. It's not that we're trying to be dishonest. Our brains will recall fast answers, but those answers aren't necessarily reliable. So we want to avoid these direct questions out of context. Instead, what we want to do is we want to focus on collecting specific stories. So instead of saying, what do you like to watch? Who do you watch with? I want to say, tell me about the last time you watched Netflix. And then I'm going to collect the story. And as I collect all the details, I can get answers to all those questions. Where were you? Who were you with? How did you decide what to watch? How often did you watch? But because I'm collecting the answers in the context of a specific story, the answers are going to be far more reliable. They're going to reflect your actual behavior. The other advantage of collecting specific stories is opportunities emerge from customer stories. So when we hear somebody's story, we start to hear needs, we start to hear pain points, and we start to hear desires. We're going to hear things like, it's hard to find something to watch. I don't know if this show is good or not. I want to watch on my iPad, but I don't have a very good internet connection, right? As the stories, as our customers start to tell us stories, we're going to start to hear specific opportunities. And as we collect those opportunities, if we take the time to map out the opportunity space, we can start to get a big picture view of how we might reach our desired outcome. So we can start to make a more strategic decision about which opportunities matter most, which customer problems should we solve, how are we going to create customer value in a way that creates business value. And once we choose a target opportunity, I then want to encourage you to work with 3 solutions at the same time. And I want to be really clear here. There are 3 solutions for the same target opportunity. This is different from what a lot of teams do. A lot of teams hear a customer need and they jump to their first solution. And even if they're doing all the right discovery activities, they're prototyping, they're testing their ideas. If they're working with one idea at a time, they're saying, is this idea good or not? They're framing that question in a way that decision-making researchers tell us is problematic. We actually want to avoid whether or not questions. And that's because this framing is going to exacerbate a couple cognitive biases. The first is called the escalation of commitment. This is a cognitive bias that basically says the more we invest in an idea, the more we identify with it, the more we commit to it. In the product world, this looks like we start to fall in love with our ideas. The more we fall in love with our ideas, the more we exacerbate confirmation bias. Confirmation bias says we're more likely to see the evidence that suggests our idea is amazing and miss the evidence that suggests our idea is flawed. So we don't want to work with one idea at a time. It's going to make it really hard for us to truly evaluate what the how strong our idea is. So instead, we want to set up what I call a compare and contrast decision. We want to work with a set of solutions and ask which of these ideas look most promising or which of these ideas look best. Now, this idea of comparing and contrasting is important enough that I want to give you a clear visual to help you remember this. This is Usain Bolt. He was once the world's fastest 100-meter runner. If you saw him running around a track by himself and I asked you, is he fast? I want you to hear a whether or not question. Is he fast or not? And I want you to ask, is he fast relative to what? Is he fast relative to a cheetah? Probably not. Is he fast relative to a Tesla? In the first 100 meters, I would pay to see that race. Is he fast relative to other humans? Absolutely. So what we're seeing on the photo in the right is a compare and contrast decision where we have a clear front runner. There's no ambiguity. We don't have to guess which idea is best. We have a clear front runner. So when we're evaluating our solutions, we want to evaluate them in a way that there's no ambiguity. It's clear which idea is our winner. Now, the reason why most teams don't do this is we're doing big project-based research to evaluate our ideas, and we don't have time to do big project-based research for 3 different ideas. We don't want to do all the pixel perfect design work for 3 ideas before we know which idea is going to win. We definitely don't want to build 3 ideas and wait for an A/B test to tell us which idea is going to win. So we need to change our research methods so that we can get fast answers earlier in the process before we do most of the work. And so this is the key to unlocking a continuous cadence, is we got to move away from our project-based research and adopt more continuous methods. So I'm gonna walk through what this looks like. I'm gonna continue with my Netflix example to show an example of what this looks like. So I want you to imagine that we interviewed a bunch of Netflix folks, and one of the opportunities we heard over and over again is I want to watch live sports. We recently finished the Summer Olympics, so to help make this a little bit more accessible, I'm going to suggest the target opportunity of I want to watch the Olympics. So Netflix is pretty good at TV shows and movies, not that good at live sports. Let's imagine that Netflix wanted to solve for this. So the product team generates 3 ideas. The first idea might be a little bit US centric. I'll try to explain it. In the United States, the Olympics are shown on one of our local public channels, NBC. So one way that Netflix could solve this in the United States would be to partner with NBC and integrate a live feed of whatever's on NBC at this moment in time, you can watch within Netflix. And so as long as the Olympics are on NBC, you can watch the Olympics on Netflix. The second idea might be, let's partner with the Olympic Committee and license broadcast rights to all their events. And we can license them just like we license movies from movie studios and integrate them into the Netflix interface. The third idea could be, maybe we decide we're Netflix, we're not very good at Netflix, we're never going to be that good at Netflix. Let's partner with somebody who already is good at Netflix. So Fubo TV is another streaming entertainment service. Here in the United States, they work a lot like our cable companies where they partner with different content channels and they stream them directly to your TV. So in this case, Fubo TV would have already partnered with NBC and they would stream the Olympics directly through that service. Okay, so we now have 3 potential solutions. We want to compare and contrast them against each other. We don't have time to do all the design work and prototype pixel perfect designs. We definitely don't want to build all 3 and wait for an A/B test to tell us what to build. So what are we going to do instead? We're going to take our ideas and break them down into their underlying assumptions. And instead of testing the ideas, we're going to test the ideas that they depend upon. Now, this is not a new idea. Eric Ries introduced this idea of testing assumptions 10 years ago in the Lean Startup. And we're still not doing it very often. And the reason why is it's very hard to see our own assumptions. So I'm going to give you some strategies for how to generate the assumptions that your ideas depend on. We're going to start with categories of assumptions. Assumptions tend to fall in 5 categories. The first 3 are maybe familiar to you because this Venn diagram is commonly used in the product space. The first is we make desirability assumptions. Why do we think people want this solution? The second is viability assumptions. Why do we think this solution will be good for our business? If we're an outcome-focused team, this is as simple as, why do we think the solution will drive our outcome? Feasibility solutions. This is as simple as, why are we assuming the solution is possible, right? So it's all about what's possible. Do we have the necessary technology? Do we have the necessary skills and abilities? Usability assumptions. So can our customers find it? Do they understand it? Are they able to do what we need them to do? And finally, ethical assumptions. Is there any potential harm in building this idea? This is where we see a lot of questions come up around data usage policies. What data are we collecting? Are customers okay with giving us that data? Can we store it appropriately? Are we using it ethically? This is also where we start to see inclusivity questions coming up. Who are we choosing to serve? And as a result, who are we leaving out, right? So we see recently a lot of conversation about products replicating some of the social inequities that we see in our communities in the products themselves. So if we take the time to surface ethical questions, we might catch, are we choosing to serve some people and leaving other people out? I know here in the United States, a really common example of this, which is not intentional, but product teams forget to question it, is we often assume our customers have a broadband, a high-speed connection, which is true in our urban areas, but it's less true in our rural areas. So if we design for it with a high-speed connection in mind, are we serving our urban dwellers and not our rural dwellers? So knowing these 5 categories, desirability, viability, feasibility, usability, and ethical, can help you generate assumptions. You can ask, why do we think people want this? Why do we think it will be good for our business? Why do we think it's possible? Why do we think customers will understand it, be able to find it? Why do we think there's no potential harm? How can we mitigate that potential harm? But even knowing these 5 categories, it can still be hard to generate assumptions. So I'm going to give you another strategy. You can story map to generate assumptions. So if you're not familiar with story mapping, it's the yellow boxes on this slide. I want you to assume your idea already exists, and you're going to map out what your customer needs to do to get value from the solution. So in this case, this is a story map for integrating local channels. Our customer has to decide they want to watch the game. They have to choose a streaming service. They have to open that streaming service. In this case, they would have to pick a local channel, and then they would have to watch whatever's on. Now, the advantage of doing this is I can go step by step and say what needs to be true in order for my customer to do each step. So they have to be a sports fan. They have to know what channel the game is on. We have to be able to partner with NBC, right? We have to be able to create a good streaming service. So this is helping me generate assumptions. The value of this is some of our assumptions are shared by all of our ideas. And if they turn out not to be true, I can throw out a whole set of ideas, or I can support a whole set of ideas with one assumption test. Some of our assumptions will differentiate our ideas, and that will allow me to collect rapid compare and contrast data. Now, idea testing can be slow. It can take weeks to run an A/B test. It can take weeks to do all the design work. Assumption testing can typically be done in a few hours or a day or two. We're a little bit short on time, but I'm going to give you 4 very quick strategies for rapidly testing assumptions. We're going to assume we're going to test this assumption our subscribers want to watch sports. The first way to test this, excuse me. The first way to test this is to prototype a specific moment. Now, I want to be clear, we're not prototyping the whole idea. We're prototyping just enough to simulate this specific moment. If you have access to an unmoderated testing tool, I could create a mockup that gives you some viewing options, and I could simply ask you, what would you like to watch right now? And if you're a sports fan, I would expect some people to choose sports. That simple. I can collect data on this assumption in less than 24 hours. The second way I can test this assumption is with a 1-question survey. 1-question surveys live within your product or service. You're getting people to respond while you already have their attention, And it's one question, so it takes them just a few seconds. In this case, I could ask, have you watched a sporting event in the past week? Yes or no. As long as you have any traffic, most people can generate enough survey responses in as short as a few hours. At most, you might need a day or two. Third way we can test this assumption is to ask, do we already have data that suggests this assumption is true? So what data can we look at? We can look at our behavioral analytics. We can look at our support tickets. We can talk to our sales teams. We can look, in this case, with Netflix, we could look at our search queries. Do we already have customers who are searching for sports? So these first three strategies, prototyping to simulate a specific moment, running a one-question survey, using data you already have to evaluate, do you already have evidence that suggests this assumption is true, is a great way to test the vast majority of assumptions. The fourth strategy is going to be particularly helpful when testing feasibility assumptions. And that's we're going to run a research spike. So a research spike is just a time-boxed amount of time where you're going to give your engineers a very specific task and ask them to investigate. You're not going to say, what would it take to build this idea? That's too open-ended. You're going to give them a very specific feasibility assumption. So in this case of integrating local channels, maybe we have a feasibility assumption is that NBC can give us reliable metadata so we can appropriately show what's on right now. So this might be, they can give us a title, a description, and an image that we can display in our interface. So we might tell our engineers, spend the next 24 hours pulling live data from the NBC feed and figure out what percentage of the time they give us reliable display data. So it's very targeted. This not only gives you compare and contrast data to compare your solutions against each other, but when we use research spikes to test feasibility assumptions, it's also going to help improve our delivery estimates. Okay, we just covered a lot of ground very quickly, so I'm going to do a quick recap. We started by defining a clear outcome. We talked about two small research activities we're going to do on a week-over-week basis. The first is interviewing to discover opportunities. The second is assumption testing to evaluate solutions. Good continuous discovery teams are doing both week over week, constantly evaluating what's the most important opportunity, what are the best solutions that might address that opportunity. Now, because we covered a lot of ground really quickly, I will share that everything we covered is covered in depth in my book, Continuous Discovery Habits. I did write this book to be a practical hands-on guide to teach product trios how to adopt these habits and to put the tactics and the framework into practice. All right, I think we're ready for questions.
Thank you, Teresa. That's for sure a lot of content. I myself will rewatch the video just to see what I've missed. So we had some questions earlier on LinkedIn. Yeah, first of all, if any of you have any questions, please write in the Zoom chat. There's a Zoom chat. Please write whatever comes to your mind. So the first one, actually the first two questions that we had were connected to the scaled approach. So how could we do this at scale, since this is mostly presented on one team level?
Yeah, so the beauty of continuous discovery is that it scales really well. Whether you have one team or 300 teams, they can all run this process. And they just run their, here's the key to scaling it well. Every team needs their own outcome. The outcome sets the scope of discovery. What are you trying to learn about? What opportunities are you exploring? What solutions might you consider? So when you're scaling this, you have to think about, how do I define outcomes such that every team has their own outcome? And you're setting adjacent teams' outcomes as health metrics, counterweights. So what that might look like in our Netflix example is we might have one team focused on customer acquisition and another team focused on retention. We don't want our customer acquisition team acquiring customers that won't retain. So we're going to say your outcome is increased customer acquisition without negatively impacting retention. And we'll do the same for the retention team. Your goal is to increase customer retention without negatively impacting customer acquisition. The second thing we need to do when we're working at scale is we need to make sure we automate our recruiting process in a way that our customers are opting in. You don't want your teams reaching out to customers, because you're then gonna have this coordination work of, did 7 teams reach out to the same customer? But if you build hooks within your product where your customer is opting in, You can automate a lot of that, where if a customer has participated in an interview recently, you can make it so that they don't see the ask, right? So those are the two big things to keep in mind when doing this at scale, is you have to put a little more attention on how you're defining your outcomes, and you really have to make sure you automate that recruiting process in a way that you're not going to inundate your customers with requests.
Okay, thanks. There was like a sub question of this, like what would be the right levels for decision making in product discovery in this large setup? Since I think then we have multiple levels.
Yeah, so each trio is still responsible for their own decision making. If you give each trio their own outcome, they're deciding the best path to that outcome. And that's really critical. Now, that sounds really chaotic, right? Because how do we have a coherent product when all of these different teams are making their own decisions? So we also need to put some rituals in place where we make sure that teams are sharing what they're learning with each other, that everybody's aware of what their adjacent teams are doing. There's a lot of visuals in the book that can help you with this, right? We can use experience maps. We can use opportunity solution trees. We can use interview snapshots. We can use story mapping to quickly keep people up to date on what adjacent teams are doing. And we can combine those visuals with a lot of our asynchronous collaboration tools, right? We can follow our adjacent teams' Slack channels and make sure that what we're doing is consistent with what other teams are doing. We can use things like design studios to help keep everybody up to speed on what's going on in the organization. We can use our weekly demos to help keep our adjacent teams current on what we're doing. So we do need to make sure that we're doing that horizontal across team work, but it doesn't have to be a heavy lift. If you're using a lot of the visual methods to do your own discovery, those same methods help you keep other teams up to date on what you're doing.
Okay, great, thanks. So there's another one. It says like, in your book, Continuous Product Discovery, you refer to the term business value, and it would be great if you can give a definition on business value from your perspective and whether it overlaps with customer value at some point. I know you touched on this, but maybe you can explore it a bit.
Yeah, so business value is going to be tied to your business model, right? So your business model is going to determine the types of business outcomes that matter for your company. And really, business value is just how are we making sure that we are a sustainable business over time, which means our business model is working, we're able to generate profit so that we earn the right to continue to serve our customer. And a lot of people think about business value as at odds with customer value, but I don't think that's true. I think we have to create a healthy business. Otherwise, we will not survive to serve our customer. So a truly customer-centric team has to also care about business value. And so your business value is going to be defined by the metrics that drive your business model. So in Netflix example, in a subscription business model, the metrics that drive that: customer acquisition, average revenue per customer, lifetime value of a customer. That's where we get into things like increasing retention, reducing churn, increasing average monthly spend. These are all business outcomes that create business value. Now, we don't want to just focus on business outcomes at the cost of the customer. That's where customer value comes in. We want to make sure we're addressing opportunities as a way of driving business value. So we're not going to increase customer retention by tricking them into staying, right? That's not customer centric. We're going to create customer retention, that business outcome, by addressing customer needs, pain points, and desires. And so that's where that opportunity solution tree adds a lot of power. It's helping us align customer value with business value so that we can create value for our business and earn the right to serve our customers over time while also creating value for our customer.
Nice, thanks. Here's a very specific one. So could you share some tips on how to get feedback from SaaS business customers, especially from those that stopped using our service or didn't convert during the trial? We tried with questionnaires on the cancel page and emailing users directly, but the response rate was quite low. In one of the podcasts, you mentioned that we should offer something in return for users' time. Any tips on what to offer in that case?
Yeah, so talking to churned customers can be very hard, and it's because they are going to think that you're trying to resell them. So what I would recommend is try to talk to them while they're in that trial. That's the easiest thing to do, right? Is to make sure that you're talking to as many customers as you can while they're in that trial period, so you can start to build a model of what are your predictors of churn, right? That's also what's going to help you reduce churn. So as you start to interview people while they're in that trial period, you'll start to hear about those pain points that are leading to them churning. So that's the first thing. There are ways to attract customers that have churned. It's very hard. Those are going to be the hardest people to recruit. You're going to have to come up with an incentive that really matters to them. Most of the time, our incentives are related to our own products and services. And if they churned, those incentives are not going to be relevant to them. So you might have to look at, do you have an adjacent product in your market that churned customers are going to value that you can use as an incentive? So maybe that means I'm actually going to pay for them to go to a competitor in the short run in order for them to talk to me, which might sound crazy, but if it's getting you the intel you need to fix your problems, it's worth it in the short run, right? So I've seen companies do things like, hey, we understand you don't have success with your product. We're not trying to sell you to come back. We really do want to learn from you. And a way of showing how true that is, we're willing to pay for your next 2 or 3 months on our competitor's platform, or your next 30 days on our competitor's platform. What that does is it communicates very clearly, this is not a sales call, and it gives them something that's valuable. And especially if you let them pick the platform they want to go to. That's just one example. There's lots of ways to do this, but I would try very hard to talk to them before they churn, because trying to get them to talk to you after they churn will take a heavy lift, like paying for them to use your competitor.
Thanks. The next one is, how do you jump from a 2-3 set of weekly interviews to define the opportunities? So how do you know something is a finding/insight and not irrelevant data?
Yeah, so this is definitely a skill. So there's the skill around opportunity framing. The first thing is you have to collect specific stories in your interviews. If you're just asking a whole bunch of who, what, why, how questions, you're not getting the context and the nuance in which opportunities emerge. So if I ask Igor, what do you like to watch on Netflix? I'm going to get back something like action movies, right? What's the opportunity there? I have no idea. But if I ask him to tell me a story about the last time he watched Netflix, and I start to hear things like he has an unreliable internet connection and it's really hard to know if a movie is good or not, or he has to negotiate with his spouse about what's the most important, like what they should watch tonight after dinner. That's where needs, pain points, and desires start to emerge. So it starts with shifting to a story-based interview format. And then there's still this work, the skill to develop of how do you frame opportunities. I do cover this in the book. If you want practice, we do also have a course on opportunity mapping that gets into how do you pull opportunities from interviews. You can learn about our courses at learn.producttalk.org. It will take some practice. You will have to develop that skill, but it does pay off because it will help you find unmet needs that will really differentiate you from your competitors.
Yeah, I've already put the links in the chat. When I saw that question, I totally recognized your course. And I can say I was in the course and it's great. The continuous interviewing one as well, but for the other ones, I still don't have time to do them. So next question, how would you interview in research without having user? So imagine a startup that is just starting. What would you consider a decent number of interviews and surveys answered in this case?
Yeah, so I can't tell you a decent number of interviews because remember, you're interviewing continuously. So you're never done. It's not like you're going to talk to 5 customers and say, okay, I understand my customers. You're always interviewing. So the challenge with a brand new startup is all the methods we talked about recruiting assume you already have customers. So if you don't have customers, there's 2 things you can think about. How do you bring customers to you? And how do you go to where your customers are? So in the first strategy, you can build a landing page. You do not need to have a product yet. And you can run advertising to bring people to you. And then you can use your landing page to book interviews. So I'll give an example. Let's say I'm starting a new company. I want to help podcasters. I want to help them grow their audience. I don't know what the product's going to be yet. I just know I know that that's a pain point and I want to help them solve it. I can launch a landing page targeted to podcasters that's all about the pain point of, do you need help finding more podcast listeners? If so, sign up to learn more about our product when it's available. And then I can reach out to the people that sign up and interview them. So that's the first thing, is you can use advertising to bring people to you. The other thing you can do is go to where they are. So where do they hang out? In this podcast example, are there Reddit groups about podcasting? Are there LinkedIn groups about podcasting? Are there bloggers about podcasting? How do I go to where my customers are and use those places to recruit? Now, what you don't want to do is be a stranger and just dump a message in the community and say, hey, will you do an interview? Because you're not going to get any responses. You need to go be a participant in those communities and learn from the communities. And then as you build relationships, you'll find people to talk to.
Okay, nice. We have one more question from Predrag, and see if he wants to ask it himself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. Hi, Teresa. Thanks for this wonderful opportunity to hear you and ask some questions. I was thinking there are so many things that a product person should do, when involved with the product. So, and as the product itself evolves, the things get even more complicated. So what I was wondering is, what do you say how to manage, or how to split responsibility inside one product between different product persons once the product becomes so complex that one person cannot handle it all?
Yeah, this is really tied to how you're going to define your outcomes, right? So let's use Netflix again as our example. If Netflix was a startup and they only had 3 product teams, they might have 3 different outcomes. One focused on customer acquisition, one focused on increasing average revenue per month, and one focused on retention. As Netflix grows, they might have 20 teams focused on retention. So they have to divide that metric up. They have to think about, maybe they have a team focused on first-time user retention. Maybe they have a team focused on choosing what to watch. And so they're going to retain people by making it easier to choose what to watch. They probably have a team focused on search. They probably have a team focused on browsing. They probably have half a dozen teams on recommendations, right? So as you grow, you're splitting your outcomes, right? So what drives retention? Probably a mix of engagement and satisfaction. So maybe they have a team focused on engagement and a team focused on satisfaction. What drives engagement? Different steps on the customer journey. So maybe they have different teams for different steps of the customer journey. So you can keep branching. You can start with those business model outcomes and then keep branching them to get more and more specific as your team size grows and as the number of teams grow. And that gives each team their own space to explore and the ability to kind of drive their own discovery process.
Thank you. Clear. Thanks.
Okay, great. So the next one is from Ninoslav. I've pinged him in a private message, but he's not responding, so I'll be reading this. How can we avoid the trap?
Sorry, Igor. Maybe I can ask. Sorry, didn't see it. Hi, Teresa. Just quick one. I don't have like problem interviewing customers, but there is, let's say, often a problem because the clients can be not be biased, but can lean you to maybe some wrong side because they have their own habits, because they even if you have A/B testing, they're not get used to the change. So basically, they're leaning to something they already use or something. I'm speaking now from user experience side. So often this is a problem. So maybe advice from your side, how can we escape this trap? And because like we are the prisoners of client habits. So
yeah, so the key here, I'm gonna sound a little bit like a broken record. You want to focus on collecting specific stories, and the stories need to be broader than just your product. So again, I'll use Netflix as an example. I do want to interview you about the last time you used Netflix, but I want to understand the context in which it occurred. I don't want to just get the screen by screen flow of what you did. I want to dig in and understand things like, how did you choose what to watch? Who was part of that decision with you? What was your environment that you were in? All of that context is going to help me understand your underlying needs. And so the way that you're solving those needs today may not be optimal, right? You're not an expert in technology. You have bad habits maybe, but it's not about your habits that I'm learning about. I want to collect enough context and nuance to understand what problems, what needs those habits were designed to solve. And that's what I'm really pulling from the story. So you might be telling me all about how maybe you have this really archaic habit of like, you first browse on Netflix through all the little rows of movies, you find something you want to watch, and then for some weird reason, you jump over to search and enter the movie title into the search to find it a second time. I don't know why you do that, right? But it's my job as the interviewer to uncover that need. What's happening that's leading to that behavior so I can design a better solution for it. So the key here is when interviewing, even though the interview might be about how they're using your product, you have to dig deeper to understand why. And it's the why, it's those needs, those pain points, those desires that are going to help you get at how do you influence and change those habits.
Yeah. I have one situation. I don't want to take so much time. One situation when we finish some software for process optimization. We provided the metrics. It was much faster, much usable. And then after some time, they asked me, "Can you please implement something like Excel?" I ask why, because we used to work on it. So it's like yeah. This is why I say the clients are prisoner of their habits. So, but I think it's our job to push them.
Or perhaps there's a competing need there, right? So we see this a lot. When things get fully automated, sometimes people resist. Maybe they identify with that being part of their job. Maybe they want it to be a little bit more manual. Maybe they're concerned about their value being automated, right? These are guesses. I don't know your customer. I don't know the context. There's a competing need for you to uncover.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you, Teresa, so much. I see that we have a couple more questions, but since time is out, I can suggest a couple of ways to solve that. One is maybe try writing on the LinkedIn event. If Teresa has some free time, I'm not sure about that, she can maybe answer. I know Teresa has her Slack community. So if you have questions that need answering, she's really great with that, always active. And there's a ton of other people with whom you can talk. And that's, I think, about it. Thank you all. And thank you for coming. See you next time. Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn. I think we'll make more sessions like this, hopefully. And if there's any topics that you you would like to hear, please write to us and we'll see what we can do. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day and see you. Bye-bye.